It's Victor Perton here. This is the Centre for Optimism, and I am excited, as I always am, but in particular because my old friend from university days, so you can imagine it's been many decades, Sue Barrett is joining us. And when I introduce her to other people, I say she is the queen of sales leadership, not just in Australia, but in Asia Pac and globally. And we're also joined by Rob Masters, the chairman of the Centre for Optimism and Australia, and one of the global leaders in crisis communication. So, Sue, welcome.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you, Victor.
Hi, Rob. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
And welcome to everyone. So if you're watching us on Zoom, you're able to ask questions via the Q&A button at the bottom. If you're watching us on Facebook, I'm afraid I can't cover the Facebook questions, so you need to move across to Zoom, or if you want to ask a question, save it up to the end and we'll give it to Sue to answer after the end of this broadcast. So Sue, in all of these webcasts, the first question we always ask our guests is, what makes you optimistic?
Well, it's been, I think, a challenging time for us all. And if I preface it by saying that when all of this change happens to us and it kind of becomes overwhelming, it's very easy to kind of go into fight, flight and freeze mode, where we kind of can shut down and actually just cope with the situation. But what makes me optimistic are a couple of things. One is, whilst there has been a bit of a run on toilet paper and various things, there's good nature and goodwill out there. There are people doing good things for each other. They're banding together. They're actually coming around and actually working out how can we get ourselves through this situation? How can we actually make ourselves survive and thrive? That's one thing that's making me optimistic. The other thing that's actually making me optimistic is the enormous amount of opportunity if you know where to look. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of people have, is that they actually don't know where the hidden opportunities are in what we call the actual supply chain, the supply chain of supply chains. Indeed, that's terrific. So yes, the thing that I think is good is that despite people being in panic mode, or a number of us, there's a lot of us actually realizing that we're all in this together. And how do we actually get through this, and what will come out the other end as a result of working together? And the second thing is the abundance of business opportunities that are out there if we know where to look, which is what I really want to help us focus on today.
Look, it's the key question. The reason people have joined us on Zoom and on Facebook, etc. Sue, how do we sell? I'm in lockdown, Rob's in lockdown, you're in lockdown. How do people keep selling in a time of pandemic? What's the strategy that they need to adopt, and what are the tactics?
Okay, well, the first thing we have to think about is that you have to, if you're in business, you have to check the health of your current clients, your markets that you operate in. Are they still functioning? Have you still got business opportunity? But sitting there waiting for the phone to ring isn't going to cut it anymore. So the number one thing you need to do when you're first looking at how to keep selling is get in touch with people and check how they're going, what's happening, and can you still work together? Because depending on what kind of business you're in, there are quite a few of us that can still do our work. We're doing a lot of remote work, for example, in education and strategy work and consulting and coaching. So we can still keep doing work here. So what can you do is the question to ask. And is there still work to be had there? Number one. Number two is to take time to step back and actually really start to look at where are the hidden opportunities? What is actually out there in the supply chain of supply chains? And what we must do now, if there wasn't a time before, the time is now to start doing systems thinking. Not just linear supply chain thinking, but systems thinking. The systems have always been there, but people haven't been thinking or working like that. And now is the time to bring about systems thinking. And I can show us a couple of ways of doing that.
Fantastic. Well, how do we stay in business and keep selling, Sue?
All right, so let's have a look at this first. I'm going to share a couple of things on the screen with us. So let me just go there first. What I thought I would do, can everyone see the apple?
Yes.
Everyone's got the apple there. Okay, great.
People
So,
can wave if they want to.
so what I want to do is let's just think about an apple and how does an apple actually get to us as the end consumer? Unless, of course, we're growing it on our own tree. But let's say we're getting the apple. We don't grow apples ourselves. We want to get them. So now let's have a look here. And I'll just go page down. So there's the apple. And there, of course, is us, the consumers of the apple. So how does it actually get there? Well, we've got to think about the integrated system of opportunities. So what we've got here is there's a farmer that grows an apple in their orchard. There is a wholesaler that actually will collect those and then distribute them to the retailer. And then the retailer, of course, passes them on to us. This is how most people look at supply chain. It looks simple, it looks straightforward. But in fact, what we've got is an integrated system of opportunity. So whilst I won't be covering every single area, I thought I'd just point out what's actually in here. So let's look at this next bit. Let's just think of the farmer, for instance. The farmer's got to have raw materials, whether it's from seeds and fertilizers and refreshed soils and other resources and things to actually keep his farm or her farm going. There's parts and equipment from tractors to netting to all sorts of things if you're an orchard farmer. Then they've got to package it up and they've got to have pickers and packers. There's also warehousing. Do they store it on their own properties in refrigerated warehousing, or do they have to pass it on to somewhere else, such as the wholesalers? There's merchandising. I mean, just think about the stickers that are on the apple. That's got to come from somewhere. So when we start to look at the hidden areas, the integrated systems, the supply chain of supply chains, you can already start to see that there's business there. Now, if we think about the market at the moment, there are marketplaces that are obviously really struggling. So, of course, hospitality and all of those areas where people congregate, sports, all sorts of stuff, which is dreadful and devastating, and of course, affecting people's livelihoods. But then there's also businesses that are actually flourishing during this time, such as food and essential services or products, as well as health. If I just pick those, there are others, but just keep those in your mind, which is why I wanted to focus on, for example, a piece of food like an apple. If we go a step further and we have a look at what's next, we've then also got to get this apple to us, the consumer. So we're looking at things like logistics, transport, fuel, maintenance and repairs. We're looking at drivers. We're looking at home deliveries. We're looking at insurance. We're looking at the internet that you can go and order your home delivery on. We're looking at all sorts of things that go with that just to get that apple to a retailer to get to us. Of course, you could go direct, but then there's also farmers markets, but then also too, there's a lot of us and less suppliers. So you've got to look at all of these things. There are businesses in here and business opportunities. Let's go one step further. All of the businesses that work in this integrated supply chain of systems also need to have branding, marketing, advertising, sales and service and communications, and they need to then have business strategies, marketing and sales strategies, HR, operations, finance, admin, IT, etc. So when you start to look at the supply chain within supply chains, if I go to the next slide, it's not linear. It's basically a whole range of opportunities in there. And so what we have to do when we're looking at these opportunities is we need to think about some key questions that we can actually ask. So whatever business you're in, where are these businesses? And are you able to work with them? Or are you one of them? Or could you become one of them? Could you service them? Or could you be a resource to them? So this is where people, if they step back away from where they're currently selling and they start looking at the integrated system of opportunity, the supply chain within supply chains, they may in fact actually discover that there are perfectly viable markets that they could actually work with and customers they could start to engage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very, very much so.
But the problem with most people is that they don't do the thinking. They don't do the strategy. They react to markets. And you can't blame people for the current state to be a bit reactive. But this is when you've got to have a cool head and you've got to step back. And if you have some time, you have to move quickly, but you have to do the thinking and then look at how you can adapt, adjust, rearrange yourself as a business to be able to go out and pursue opportunity. And so with that, when you're looking at those sorts of things, you need to then look at the integrated selling better operating system, which is what we talk about. Most people in my world out there, when they look at improving sales, just think sales training. Training is the last 10%. If you don't have a proper system in which to train your people to sell into, there's no point doing training. So when I look at the thing, if I just take you on a quick tour of this and then I'll be quiet, what we're really looking at here as a business, you've got to do your analysis. You've got to understand where are the opportunities. So if we look at the lighthouse, we've got to stop, take a big picture view and see where are those markets, where are those businesses, am I one of them, could I be one of them, or can I service them, or can I actually resource those businesses to do my work with them. You've then got to set a navigational system about how you're going to do that. You're going to need to direct your own services or your team services to start to talk to people. So who do I need to be in front of? What do I need to offer them? What's our value proposition? And so on and so forth. And obviously set yourself goals and targets, which is where the little flag comes into play. You then need to set your people up with a proper operating system. So how do we sell around here? It could change. It could be that we need to do all our calls via Zoom. It could be that we start to do more online marketing and sales activities to engage our customers. But we've got to understand our marketplace first and what they're after before we set up our team to then equip them and resource them to be able to go to market with those opportunities. Of course, you would do this in concert with an integrated marketing strategy as well. You then got to make sure that your people know what the measures are, what the KPIs. So here's a little balance here. You've also got to help develop them. They may have to learn new skills, in terms of being able to sell better in this climate. And also, do not forget, which I know we'll talk a bit about later, is leadership, coaching and developing of people. We need stewardship like we've never needed stewardship and leadership before, from all the way from a national, political level through to business levels. We need to be there for our customers. We need to be there for them. And we need courage, but you can't have courage unless you have a good strategy, an operating system and good people. The last thing we want to do is get rid of our people. Then we want to make sure we've got good business. And then ultimately, when you pull your system together, you can really create a culture that's really flourishing. So that tree, for example, isn't just a tree. It's filled with all sorts of ingredients, all these beautiful creatures that live in there. Everything is this ecosystem of opportunity. This little diagram here is really illustrating the customer and making sure we're customer centric. And when we pull all of this together, we can really start to drive opportunity and results. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. It's tough out there, absolutely. And for some businesses, it's so tough they're out of business because their market has dried up. But how can we repurpose those people into new roles? How can we really help them actually bring on board? Because those businesses that are flourishing are going to need more resources. They're going to need more people. How can we help people transition into these kinds of roles where there is more business? But until business leaders from large through to small businesses stop panicking and start looking at where the opportunities are in the integrated system, then we're all just going to be frozen in fear and it'll all just dry up. So we can't do that. We have to carry on. Even if we feel it's hopeless, there is always opportunity. Does that make sense? And I'll stop sharing now.
You have sold me, Sue. Every time you speak, I'm just overwhelmed because my heart sort of rushes. So it's fantastic. Look, you and Rob are the king and queen of strategy. Rob, what's your take on?
Oh, well, I agree with you. It was very insightful. One of the things, Sue, that I'm noticing, particularly with LinkedIn, a number of people are actually putting forward suggestions on how people should act and market themselves and their business through LinkedIn in the current environment. What do you think of that? Because to me, that seems to be the complete opposite to what you've just said.
Well, I think the challenge is that unless you understand where your customer base is at or the markets you could operate at, What are they thinking about at the moment? What's on their mind? What's top of mind for them? Because if you're just pushing something at people, you're not helping anyone. And if people are just promoting themselves out there without context, without care, without consideration of the situation we find ourselves in, then their messages are going to fall flat and in fact could be taken the wrong way. I think that what's very important is that before we launch out there and throw ourselves at people through LinkedIn advertising or whatever, because that just becomes all this noise, is step back and actually look at what can we do to help people. So maybe I'll just show one more slide here. Let me go to this now, and I'll just go down to the next slide. Because here's what the secret is. Great salespeople, they're all about opportunity. They're also about collaboration, which is a we-focused approach, not a me, look at me on LinkedIn focused approach. And they're very solutions-oriented. So my advice would be, whenever you see any of this, look for the helpers. Look for the people who have got the big picture in mind and know how their talent supports the overarching system or helps us adapt to better ways of doing things, or being able to challenge, go through challenges. Unless they can make it contextually relevant, they won't help anyone.
So you've also said in your book, which is Selling Better, just on that last slide, you're highlighting the need to lead with empathy, collaboration, and cooperation. Can you just explain how those three terms fit into what you've just put up on that slide?
Absolutely. Firstly, I think if we come back to the fact that for some time now we've had what we call a trust deficit, okay? And all of what we're doing is about forging good, ideally healthy, constructive, fruitful relationships with each other. Or else why would we do business with each other? Okay. So I like to take trust to the next level, which is trustworthiness. And trustworthiness is made up of three things: authenticity, empathy, and logic. So now when you start to think about helping people navigate their way through these really troubled times, but also helping people to see what's possible without it sounding like spin and fluff. People have got a good BS detector. They need to know that, I've got to be practical now. I've got to survive. I've got to be able to look after my family. I don't want to invest in things. I'm risk averse. I mean, why should I bother listening to anyone? Ultimately, when we come back to being otherish, other-centered, and we work together in a collaborative way, we actually can help each other move forward. In fact, I have to collect this because Jens Hartmann, our head of L&D, shared this with me the other day. And I think it's at the heart of this. And it's kind of ironic given where it's coming from. So let me just share this with you. The former Survivor contestant, so you know the program Survivor, and she's now a professor in scarcity. Kelly Goldsmith is her name. She showed that when people are experiencing personal scarcity, that they want to protect themselves first. They don't actually want to hurt other people, but they want to preserve their own security, health, and safety. Hence the problem we see with toilet paper, for example. Okay. But what she actually found on Survivor, even though we think Survivor is dog eat dog, she actually found on Survivor that the best people on Survivor were those who worked together with each other to get through the tough situations. And yes, they had eliminations, but in fact, it was the interconnectivity and the collaboration and the success of the units working together that actually allowed them to survive, ironically. So I think what's really interesting is that whether it's our own personal security, or it's the security of our business, or it's the security of our state and nation, or whatever it might be, collaboration is the new competition. And that's what we need to focus on. The challenge, of course, is that the more independent we think we are, the worse it gets. In fact, she pointed out, Kelly Goldsmith, that the virus is being interpreted in the US as an individual threat. And so what they're doing is they're buying guns to protect themselves. Whereas in fact, the opportunity for us in business and society is to see the virus as something that brings us together as an interdependent society where we can help each other. So for example, who would have thought that gin distilleries and, you know, high-end perfume manufacturers and high-end champagne manufacturers were now actually making hand sanitizers for France and the rest of the world? Right? So this is where opportunities abound. They never thought they were going to be hand sanitizer, but and a lot of them are doing it for free because they can afford to for the common good. So we're going to see these sorts of things when we come together. We are human-centered. We are social animals. We actually are born to help each other. So this is why I keep encouraging people to see good selling, good service, good business is all about an interconnected, working together collaboratively to do good work and help each other move forward. And that's something to be optimistic about.
Well, you two are both experts in communications. One of the things I'm seeing from so many companies, whether it's Hilton and the hotels or the airlines, the same sort of rubbishy email from the CEO. We care about you, we care about our staff, and oh well, here, let me tell you to wash your hands. There's sort of a lack of authenticity about it, as if it's all been written down by some copywriter. But occasionally there's a little glint, you know, there's the CEO that talks about optimism, or the head of the Mormon church who said, we're all going to get through this and we need to be optimistic as we, you know, move into the recovery phase. So what are your principles for salespeople, for CEOs, communicating with their customers about what they're doing during the lockdown and during the pandemic?
Well, Rob, if it's all right, what we have to do is take time to reflect first. Not just react to some message that you just fling out, because that's kind of protocol. So I come back to what I said earlier. You need to stop and look at what's happening, where can we be of help, where can we also do business, because there's a difference between reciprocity and generosity. Okay, reciprocity is essential for business because it's ideally a fair exchange of value, and we have to keep in business and we have to keep the wheels of commerce going. So where can we find reciprocity with each other in business? Okay, and then where can we find generosity, which is to give something without expecting something in return. Let's not confuse the two. Seth Godin's got a really pithy quote about this, or a blog about this, the difference between reciprocity and generosity. So know the difference, because a lot of people think, oh, well, I'll just help and I won't charge you. Well, how are you going to stay in business? So know where you're doing reciprocity and know where you're doing generosity. There's some of the things I would think about. Sorry, Rob, you're the communications crisis man.
Well, Sue, I like the three words that you used before, and that was empathy, collaboration, and cooperation. But in all of them, they've actually got to paint the solutions, which you actually started to refer to at the beginning, in looking at the market and how you do your analytics at the start. If they keep it at the platitudinal level, people will just turn off. And this gets back to the trust factor as well, because no one believed them when we had this, we probably still do have, this concern about corporate and government trust, or the lack of. But no one is painting solutions. Now, you can say that the federal government has started to paint solutions by the grants and the various financial packages that they're putting forward. But people want to know how to get there. And you've started to paint that direction on how to get there. And this is what they need. This is what leaders have to espouse, and they have to provide that direction. But they also have to show the empathy. And I think the leaders have been trying to do that. They've been seeking collaboration on it and cooperation. But to my way of thinking, there's still solutions that need to be provided. And solutions aren't just in this environment. The vaccine. that's the result of a cause to the virus itself. But people are seeking solutions to how can they survive in their business as well. And that's what you're starting to provide. So.
Yeah, and I think this is the challenge that, yeah, you're right. We don't want platitudes. People, they don't want to just have a pat in the back. They need to know, how am I going to run my business for the future? Now, I think the challenge is that a lot of people, as I said, have been used to thinking more linearly. They haven't been taught how to think in a systems-oriented way. And it's not easy, but it's not overwhelming either. You have to know how to think about this. This is the sort of work we're doing all the time in how to help businesses pivot and reorient themselves for the future around their markets, their customers, how they orient their teams, how they pull it together, and you know, from your strategy, processes, and people and culture. And you can do it, and it's very practical and it's very workable, but we have to give people practical pathways moving forward. And I agree. So that's just why, you know, I'm on this mission to bring systems thinking, you know, sales systems thinking to businesses, because at the heart of it, without customers, we don't have a business. Without members, without patrons, without anyone. Yes, there are some businesses at the moment that have absolutely been knocked out for the count for a period of time. They will come back, but how do we redeploy things? A lot of, look, this might be a bit controversial, but the senior executives, a lot of the bigger businesses lack courage. They've been doing standard operating procedure for a long, long time, made a lot of money out of it, and now all of a sudden their business has been hit, and they obviously don't know how to really think about and adapt. That's where the beauty of SMEs, you know, small to medium enterprises, even though it's much harder for us, we don't have a lot of liquidity to keep us going. But if we're really clever and we can think and be adaptive and really start to look at where we can go, we can move more quickly than these big behemoths out there. But we're all in it together. So I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but we've all got to stop thinking that I'll just close our eyes and this will go away. The world has fundamentally changed forever as a result of this, but the opportunities that will emerge out of it will be absolutely amazing. Go.
I've got a great question here from Lisa, which follows this up absolutely. This will challenge traditional power structures and require lots of collaboration. How can leaders and business owners change their thinking? Sue, Rob?
Rob, you can go first this time.
I think basically it's showing, as you said before, showing courage and leadership. That means making a stance and dispense with all the platitudes. Yes, by all means, show empathy and show cooperation and collaboration, but actually make a stance on some of these things. And, you know, I've been critical of the supermarket leaders in not looking at where the customer has actually approached the whole buying habit of what they've done. And they could have, I think, could have abated some of the, what I called outrage or shopper outrage, where you saw all those shelves denuded, etc. This is where leadership starts to come in. But they cannot, as you said before, Sue, they cannot do it in the old corporate think way. They've got to provide these solutions to abate, overcome some of the problems that society is currently faced with.
And this is, I agree, I think this is where people have to look at alternative models and different practices and even different economic models, which is pretty out there, but there's amazing thinking out there. So, you know, the problem with most people and most societies is they won't change until there is a crisis. So this is where we can actually start to, this is not working anymore. What can be put in place? There is brilliant thinking out there. There's brilliant ideas about how we can actually do different ways of working. There's circular economies, you know, there are co-ops, there are all sorts of business models out there that can really actually help people find new and better business opportunities. One of the ways we do it, though, where we can start to get them out of this standard operating procedure, you know, profit maximization, shareholder return thinking, okay, is that what we do is we get people to look forward and then look back at how they got to wherever they got. What would, if we looked at December 2020, so it's not far away, feels like a lifetime away given all the trauma, but what if we looked at all these things, if all the changes that people are creating, because it's on the ground that the changes will happen. Human beings are very creative, very adaptive. If someone's not giving them something, they'll find something. I mean, Australia, in our isolation back at the turn of last century, used to be what was one of the most inventive places in the world. We created all sorts of amazing things just simply because necessity is the mother of invention. So whether it's individuals on the ground coming up with new ideas, we're not after all these bloody tech unicorns. We just need stuff that works and gets us to do things. So here's a couple of ideas that we've been talking about. So what if we got senior leaders together, businesses, and we got them thinking about, it's 2020, it's December 2020. What does our world look like now? What's happened as a result of all these changes? So here's a couple of ideas I'm throwing out there just for people to think about. So imagine the social sacrifices that we're making that actually eliminate loneliness. You know, the fact that even if we can't physically be together, we can be together in a social way like this. You know, what about, you know, that the physical distance is actually, which was forced by the virus, has actually created more proximity, which is the, you know, it's the paradox of this. We get to know people better because we actually are paying attention to them through these various means. We've got things like how we could be amazed at how quickly new cultural techniques of the digital age have suddenly become established in practice, such as what we're doing now, teleo and video conferencing, you know, which most of our colleagues have resisted. We're doing so much sales education online. We've got teams in the US and Australia who are doing education through these means with us. There's so many different ways we can do this. So what about the home office actually becomes a matter of course for us, not just something, oh, that's the working mother at home scenario. It becomes standard operating procedure and gives us back this sort of balance. We're actually communicating for real again. You know, we're actually realizing that the shutdown of civilization means that we actually start walking through forests more. We start actually going out into nature. I could go on, a couple of others to finish off. What about fake news, on the other hand, may in fact lose its value? You know, even conspiracy theories could suddenly look like slow sellers, you know, like we're being offered sour beer. You know, we may even be surprised that Trump isn't voted in November. Who knows? These are the things that could happen. The other thing too is, I think this is an important one. The crisis may, because, you know, AI has been, oh, AI is going to take over everything. So it wasn't so much technology in December 2020, but the change in social behaviour that was the key. As I said earlier, this is a big social change experiment. The fact that people will be able to remain in solidarity and constructive despite radical restrictions is a decisive factor. What we're going to see is human social intelligence has helped us through this crisis, not AI. And then finally, the disruption of connectivity through borders, closures, separations, sealing off and quarantines does not lead to the elimination of connections. Rather, it leads to the reorganisation of connectivities that hold our world together and carry us into the future. This is the phasing shift that we see, what I call socio-economic systems.
Beautifully put, Sue. I'm going to have to enjoy the nature of Port Melbourne because we were going to go to the Flinders Ranges next week, but I'd have to spend 14 days in isolation for my 7 days in the Flinders Ranges. Now, we've got another question which really follows up what both you and Rob have been talking about. It's from David. Integrity, authenticity, and trust are paramount now. Sounds like someone's read both your Bibles, Rob and Sue. How would the panel advise the big four banks, Boeing, and our governments? Rob, do you want to go first?
Yes, well, I think the big thing is to understand perception. If they don't have an understanding of perception, it makes it very, very hard to get back to strategy and strategic thinking as to solutions. So understand the perceptions out there at the moment. And, you know, fear is one of the big perceptions there, but what is the fear? Is it fear of, you know, I won't have enough money? Is it the fear of getting the virus? Fear of I may even die? It's understanding what those fears are and then working the strategy around that. So I never move away from an understanding of perception as far as trust is concerned. And to me, also that allows you to understand what confidence and the community approach to collaboration is as well. So perception, understand what it means, do your analysis, as Sue was saying earlier, analyze the market, and analyze your target audiences or your customer base, stakeholders, and then start to work out exactly which directions you should go.
So Sue, you've written a lot about integrity, authenticity and trust. You're advising the big four banks and Boeing and the government. What would you do?
Well, the main thing I would do is actually change how they're all remunerated, because at the end of the day, a lot of people actually complained that, oh, it was these toxic sales cultures, selling was the big problem. It wasn't selling at all that was the problem. It was the intention of those organizations to go out and deliberately deceive their customer bases. And then they rewarded people in such a way that encouraged that deception. So to me, intention and how we remunerate people go hand in hand. And if they actually then cause people to do things to cover their own butts rather than actually work in collaboration and serve each other, that is at the heart of the problem. Obviously there's various systems in there, but I would come back to what is the intention of your organization in terms of its duty of care to actually be part of community and actually work with your clients and actually create holistic systems, because good business is good for community. It's good for people. And this whole sort of, strip mining people, and this whole, as I said, the old paradigm of profit maximization, shareholder return is dying. And it should die a death, because that's not how healthy systems flourish. So I think that these organizations really need to look at what is their overarching intention. And the other thing is, Boeing aside, big banks need to be very careful, because remember, necessity is the mother of invention. There are all of these little fintechs out there who are going to be able to provide services in a much more economical way, or simpler way, or more customer-centric way, whatever it might be. And unless they're actually very, very perceptive and doing their due diligence, not just on their markets, but their competitors or potential competitors, then they could actually be left wanting at the end of the day. Now, they all say they're too big to fail, but that can happen over time. People can still fail and go out of business. So at the end of the day, unless you actually give a damn about humans and our interconnectivity as societies and as people, as humans, you will never ever be the customer-centric business you want to be. I'm sick of the tokenistic term customer centricity. Live it and be really focused on how to do that, because everybody's part of that in your community, in your business. Everybody lives by selling something.
I think, Sue, you said do no harm.
Yes.
Was a key element that you've often spoken about. I think on top of that, many of the organisations, you referred to the banks, they didn't look at their values. They put their values up, but they didn't actually practice their values. And that's where the harm set in.
Well, actually, that's why I actually challenge people around values versus virtues. Values can be just an opinion.
Yeah.
And so I actually prefer virtues, because, like Aristotle said, you can practice the virtues like a sport, like a skill. You can become better at these things. So I personally prefer to be driven by virtues. Integrity is a virtue, for example. How do we actually demonstrate? Because back to your how do I demonstrate my integrity? Not just in glib, marketing slogans. I deliberately demonstrate my integrity by how I behave and conduct myself with other human beings.
Well, David, you unleashed some passions there. So both of these speakers have talked to me at great length. So great question, David. Now, Lisa's got another question, which I think is more for you two than me. There is real fear out there, and there are mental health issues that will impact the role of leaders and business owners. So, I see it in people around me, that older people scared of even leaving their homes now, or scared that they're going to give corona to young people. And so how do you see the responsibility of dealing with this fear and the anxiety and the depression that comes out of it being shouldered by business leaders? And Lisa, if I can just add something to your question. Since 2002, the Victorian Royal Commission on Mental Health found that there's been a doubling in the rate of anxiety and depression in Victoria, and therefore probably the rest of Australia. And reading the statistics in Ireland and France, probably there as well. So how do business leaders and government deal with this all-pervasive fear that is now increasing anxiety and depression in our community?
Well, if I can just say from a human brain perspective, the brain hates uncertainty. It likes to have routine. It likes things to be calm. It doesn't like all this sort of noise and fluster. It does get bored occasionally. It wants to do things that are interesting. But if it's stuck in fight, flight, and freeze mode, it can't think. You can't actually use your prefrontal cortex to think properly. So this is why we need to be able to have these adaptive strategies that, back to Rob's point, can be translated down into practical things we can control and do now. And so how do we actually make this work? And when you give people stuff, even if you have to shape shift and adapt, we're moving this way, this is our strategy, this is where we're heading, and you involve people in the creation of that, that really starts to help people find agency. And they find a purpose to be attached to, and then they can demonstrate their capabilities by doing that. And the other thing that's very important here is to actually have conversations about how people are feeling. Now, I draw a line in the sand here to say that most people aren't trained clinical psychologists or medical professionals or psychiatrists, so they shouldn't go into clinical zone. But what we should do is still be able to talk about our feelings and emotions around this. So I believe that this century and this particular crisis is going to be able to bring up the integrated approach, not just the hard balance sheet line approach to business, but the human-centered approach to business as well. The soft skills, the selling skills, the service skills, the human caring skills, the leadership skills. These are vital life skills for everyone. And when we practice them well and we develop great coaching cultures where we help people flourish, then you start to find that people's mental health will improve. So we need strategy to guide and direct our efforts, but we need a place to be able to express ourselves and feel that we're being heard and understood so that we can carry on.
Yeah, just picking up on what you said, Sue, with the brain, I understand that fear overcomes the rational and it promotes the irrational, hence the people's rush on the supermarket, etc. One of the things that is becoming more and more important in today is the process that leaders have to actually go through to get their messages out. And I don't think a lot of thought has been given to the process in delivering the message. And some of that message has created fear. And it's a matter of how you actually, as what I was trying to actually get people to do, was to understand the fear, but then have actions provided by the leaders to actually take them through that and how they're getting on top of it. Some of the messages now are getting through along those lines, but I think the last 2 weeks has demonstrated that they've missed that message.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. And I have to say that when I look at sort of some of the political messaging coming out from various areas, you can see two contrasts. Let's call it being customer centric, customer facing. On one hand, we've got certain state premiers who are very whether they're intentional or not, I don't know, but very customer facing. They're very otherish. They're making sure that they're incorporating us in that message. They're not talking at us. Whereas others are talking at us, and that's when it's not engaging. And I'm not saying they're doing it deliberately, because it's really hard work to get that messaging right. But if you're just pushing out information that's not being curated in such a way that has been broken down to, let's call it the lowest common denominator, because some of us may have the knowledge to understand that message and interpret it, and other people just hear it as panic. And so we've got to be very careful and clever about how we actually package up information in such a way that people go, okay, that makes sense to me. This is what I could do. I always think about those ads, you know, like the slip, slop, slap ads. I always think about, you know, the norm, you know, the keep fit ads. And I think of those sorts of things and the way that they were packaged up in these little ditties and cartoons. And I'm not saying we should have a cartoon for coronavirus, although we do have now one from the federal government, but we need something if we're going to help people to absorb these messages for themselves. So I always say, sell the way your customer wants to buy, not the way you want to sell. And I think that's the challenge, is a lot of them aren't selling the way we need to buy the message.
Look, thanks. We've gone well beyond the half hour we thought we'd go. So I'd like one last question from Lisa, which is learned optimism. This is a whole new skill set. I'm not sure we have the tools and practices to help business leaders. What are your thoughts? So if I can just go first, Lisa, obviously that's what the Centre for Optimism is set up to do. And there's a wealth of material on the website. There's capacity to talk to our members. We're now spread around the world. I think the membership is over 25 countries. So we'll just be accelerating our efforts to deliver the tools. There's Sean Callahan, who's on the board, told me I had to put 7 habits of the optimist on the website. So you could even start there. But the most important thing from my perspective is the question, what makes you optimistic? So Lisa, and if everyone else there could just pause for a moment and think, what makes me optimistic? And then at the end of this session, write it down, have a look again at the website at thecenterforoptimism.com. And then your homework is your partner, your spouse, those of you who've got teenage kids at home now studying, ring someone up and say what makes you optimistic. I think that's number one. Sue, your passion is purposeful optimism. How do we teach business leaders that?
Well, really, it's basically the heart of all of our conversation today, is that purposefulness is a deliberate intention. So you and I both talk about blind optimism as being, it's basically intellectually deceptive. You can't just go, oh, I'm optimistic, and not have something substantial about it. So if we take optimism, which is your wheelhouse, and then we drive it into, and what Rob was saying before, how do we actually run better businesses? To me, that creates that purposeful optimism that gives people that orientation, that direction, something to aim for, something to contribute to, something to do. And that really starts to help people find a common ground, common purpose, and actually helps their mental health as much as their wage packet and their customer satisfaction. So there's a whole lot of things so I suppose it's really taking what you stand for, Victor, and then turning it into a business form of optimism.
Well, look, you've both been incredibly generous. So I hope you can come back in a week or two as the
Yes.
lockdown settles down and people have a lot more questions. Rob, and I think I've got you booked up for several webcasts to come. So what would the two of you wind up with? Rob, then Sue, and then I'd like to ask each of you how people can get in touch with you.
Sure.
Well, from my point of view, optimism has to be built in to every strategy that you put forward. So think about the purpose, think about the strategy elements, and then think about your objectives. And I always hear CEOs, and Sue was talking about it earlier, they say they want to win the hearts and souls of their employees. Now that's a platitudinal statement to me. There is no sense of optimism in that whatsoever. It's taking your people, your whole business down the journey of a solution, but it has to be a solution that has been driven with optimism. And it's not hard to do. It's just a new form of thinking around that word.
Yeah.
So your final word?
Well, I would just say that, look, people need to go out on a limb and be a bit adventurous. They need to start looking at the world of opportunity. If they stay like this, then that's all they'll ever see. But they can't always do it by themselves. They need to get good people around them who actually can help them see different things, maybe even challenge the way they think, not because of, just to be horrible. It's about actually going, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? We do this all the time. And there's so much golden opportunity out there for people. We've just got to get them to go out on a limb and be a bit adventurous and see there's a better way of doing business and sales, like taking that systems oriented approach and really looking at the interconnectedness of the supply chain of supply chains, and then we'll find lots of great opportunities.
So Sue, how do people get in touch with you? You've got books, you've got pamphlets. How do they find you and all of this wonderful material? Beautiful.
Okay, so they can go to barrett.com.au, or they can reach out on email at contact@barrett.com.au, or they can call us on our line there, which they can see the number, which is 03 for Melbourne, 9533 0000. So please feel free to reach out to us, find us on LinkedIn and all of that, but that should be an easy way to get in touch, and I'll now stop sharing. There we go.
And Rob?
I don't have a slide to put up, but
how do people get in touch with you?
It's really through the website robertmasters.com.au. Perfect.
Well, I can highly commend that. Lisa says I need to read your book, talking to all of us. So Lisa, you can go to Sue's website for her book, and my book, Optimism, the How and Why. I've actually made free the Kindle version for the next 5 days. To help people through this. So if you just Google it on Amazon, Optimism, the How and Why, you get the Kindle version. What we'll be doing with this broadcast is we'll be placing it on YouTube, our website, and on Facebook. So those of you who've loved it, and there's been some lovely comments from several of you, it'll be there for your friends to watch. And Sue has agreed to come back in a week or two as things settle down. And you'll see Rob on some other webcasts with me. And if there's any topics you want us to broach, we're going to be doing one on meditation, prayer, and optimism with some leading priests and meditation gurus. There'll be lots and lots of material. The nice thing, Sue, before we enter this crisis, we're already adept at Zoom. So we start with a slight comparative advantage. So finally, Sue and Rob, thank you. To our audience, thank you. And we look forward to you joining us again soon.